Energy transfers and the environment. Energy flows into the biological world from the sun. The energy from the sun is stored as chemical energy in organic molecules. All living things use organic molecules as a source of energy. However, only plants are able to use sunlight and inorganic molecules in the environment to manufacture organic molecules. Plants use a process called photosynthesis to convert inorganic molecules into organic molecules. Therefore, all life on the planet is dependent upon plants to create these organic molecules. Organisms in an ecosystem. Energy flows through the environment in the form of organic molecules. Energy moves through an ecosystem from one organism to another. Ecologists categorize every organism in an ecosystem by the organism's source of energy. All of the plants in an ecosystem are called producers. Producers are organisms that can manufacture their own organic molecules from sunlight. Next are the organisms that eat plants, the herbivores. Cows and horses are herbivores, as are caterpillars and ducks. An herbivore must be able to break down the plant's molecules and extract energy from them. The next category of organisms in an ecosystem are the animals that eat herbivores. These flesh-eating animals are called carnivores. Tigers, wolves, and snakes are carnivores. Some animals, such as bears and humans, are both herbivores and carnivores, eating both plants and animals. Such animals are called omnivores. In every ecosystem, there is a special class of consumers called decomposers, which include fungus and bacteria. Decomposers obtain their energy from the organic wastes and dead bodies of all living things in an ecosystem. Bacteria and fungi are known as decomposers because they cause decay. Decomposition of bodies and wastes releases inorganic molecules back in the environment to be used again by producers. Energy flow in an ecosystem. A path of energy through the trophic levels of an ecosystem is called a food chain. One is illustrated above. In this food chain, energy flows from the sun to the tree, to the caterpillar, to the bird eating the caterpillar. In most ecosystems, energy does not follow a simple straight line path because animals consider many different things food. If all the things an organism considers food is added to the food chain, the food chain will contain many branching pathways. This creates a complicated, interconnected path of energy called a food web, illustrated to the left. In this food web, all of the organisms that are eaten by the killer whale are shown. Then all the things that are eaten by those organisms are shown. The arrows in the diagram illustrate the flow of energy from the algae at the bottom of the food web to the other organisms in the diagram. Krill, penguin, squid, fish, and microscopic animals eat the algae. These organisms are eaten by larger ones, which are ultimately eaten by the killer whale. The food web is more accurate than the food chain in showing the flow of energy through an ecosystem. A food web shows all the energy relationships that an organism has. A food chain shows only a few. Energy transfers between organisms are inefficient. The deer that you see munching on leaves is busy acquiring energy. There is energy in the leaves, stored in the chemical bonds within their molecules. What happens to a leaf's energy after the deer consumes it? Some of the energy is transformed into fat. Another portion is used for activities such as running, breathing, and eating more leaves. However, almost half is dissipated into the environment as heat. This loss of energy occurs with every transfer of energy between organisms within an ecosystem. Thus, the amount of useful energy available to do work decreases as energy passes through an ecosystem. The loss of useful energy limits how many organisms an ecosystem can support. When a plant harvests energy from sunlight to make structural molecules such as cellulose, it stores in chemical bonds only about 1/2 of the energy it is able to capture, losing the rest as heat. This is the first of many such losses as the energy passes through the ecosystem. When an herbivore uses plant molecules to make its own molecules, only about 10% of the energy present in the plant molecules ends up in the herbivore's molecules. 90% of the energy is lost. And when a carnivore eats the herbivore, 90% of that little energy remains is then lost in making carnivore molecules. At each trophic level, the energy stored by the organism is about 1/10 of that stored by the organisms in the level below. Ecologists often portray the flow of energy through ecosystems by means of a block diagrammed called a pyramid of energy. When creating an energy pyramid, organisms in the ecosystem are placed into categories. The categories that ecologists use are called trophic levels. The producers occupy the first trophic level of an ecosystem. At the second trophic level are herbivores, animals that eat plants. They are called primary consumers in an ecosystem. At the third level of the pyramid are the carnivores that eat herbivores. These organisms are called secondary consumers. Many ecosystems contain a fourth trophic level made up of carnivores that consume other carnivores. They are called tertiary level consumers. A hawk that eats a snake is a tertiary consumer. Very rarely do ecosystems contain more than 4 trophic levels. In the diagram, each trophic level is represented by a block, and the blocks are stacked on top of one another with the lowest trophic level on the bottom. The width of each block is determined by the amount of energy stored in the organisms at that trophic level. Because the energy stored by the organisms at each trophic level is about 1/10 of that stored by the organisms in the level below, the diagram is a pyramid. In the river ecosystem shown, eelgrass and algae are producers. Turtles, snails, and caddisflies are herbivores, and beetles, bass, and sunfish are carnivores. Energy loss limits the number of trophic levels in an ecosystem. Most ecosystems involve only 3 or rarely 4 levels. Too much energy is lost at each level to allow more levels. For example, it takes very large population of zebras and wildebeest to support a small population of lions on the Serengeti Plain. Lions are outnumbered by their prey by 1,000 to 1. There are more zebras and wildebeest than lions in the Serengeti Plain because the amount of available energy determines the number of animals living in an ecosystem at any one time. The ecological complexity of the world is thus fixed in a fundamental way by the loss of potential energy that occurs at each trophic level. To determine the amount of energy present at any trophic level, ecologists usually measure biomass, the dry weight of tissue and other organic matter. By collecting, drying, and weighing all of the organisms in each trophic level of an ecosystem, ecologists obtain a pyramid of biomass, with each trophic level containing only about 10% of the biomass of the level below it. Works cited: Invitation to Biology by Curtis and Barnes, Modern Biology by Toll, Biology Principles and Explorations by Johnson and Raven.